Welcome, everybody, to Martinis with Scott, a show about winning momentum in business and in life. So 2 episodes ago, depending on when this airs, but I think 2 episodes ago, I spoke with Aaron Hammer and Rick Ryan of HMB Legal Counsel out of Chicago, and we had a conversation about really a primer on US-based bankruptcy and restructurings. We talked about Chapter 11, Chapter 7s, Subsection 5, or whatever, Chapter 5, whatever that, I think is a Subsection 5, which seems, that whole conversation seemed timely right now in the middle of this pandemic and crisis. I wanted to do the show regardless of COVID, but it seems to be a good time for it. So we also discussed not only the relevant chapters in the US, but informal restructuring and some liquidity tips for businesses that are struggling with liquidity and may need to restructure. This episode today is a Canadian version of that, and I'm having a conversation with the awesome Sheldon Title of the accounting firm MNP, which is one of the larger, I think he said the fifth largest, to hold me to that, it's in the show, fifth largest accounting firm by professional count in Canada. Sheldon is a partner member of MNP's corporate restructuring and insolvency team. He works out of the Toronto office in Canada. He helps owner managers and public companies overcome complex financial difficulties by developing practical strategies that meet the needs of key stakeholders. He's had about 20 years of experience. He knows in and out the restructuring and solvency process in Canada, and he's a great corporate advisor, coming largely from the debtor side, coming from he helps the businesses. He's not as often acting for the bank, and you can count on that. I've had some experience working with Sheldon in turnarounds. His experience includes assisting companies in real estate, retail, and manufacturing, distribution sectors, amongst others. He's been published in Rebuilding Success magazine and the Ontario Bar Association Insolvency News, speaks at industry and educational forums. He's a chartered accountant since 1985, designation of a licensed insolvency trustee and restructuring professional since 1994. Bachelor of Administration from York, and so on and so forth. You can check out his CV on MNP's website. So my conversation with Sheldon, we talk generally about how restructuring works in Canada, and we cover CCAA filings, so Company Creditors Arrangement Act, proposals under the Bankruptcy Act, so Notice of Intent to file a proposal. The acronym thrown around would be an NOI, Notice of Intent, receiverships, and again, informal restructurings. Best if you can do your restructuring out of court, which is what an informal restructuring means. And at the end of this, Sheldon gives you some great liquidity tips as well. But at the end of this, Sheldon gives you his phone number and offers for you to give him a call and get some free advice if you feel you need to reach out because you're having trouble with your business, which I thought was great of him. So that's enough of me. Enjoy the conversation, and please remember, hit subscribe. Hey, Sheldon, good to see you.
Nice seeing you, Scott.
Looks like you're in your home office in Toronto. Is that the case?
Yeah, I am, and enjoying the weather outside. It's a little nicer than it has been.
I'm here in the mountains in Fernie, BC. And here's what I learned about Fernie is we have a shoulder season that starts around mid-April and ends in March. So it just rains and it's cold and miserable. Anyways, I'm well isolated.
That's good.
Good to see you. I miss hanging out with you guys in Toronto.
Yeah, we look forward to it at some point.
Back to our lunches at the National Club.
Exactly.
So, Sheldon, I already gave your intro to the audience. You are a partner at MNP. We've dropped the old name of this firm, right? We're just strictly MNP at this point.
Yeah, so it's just MNP. So Myers Morris Penny is long. The name has long been gone now. So
I just realized I'm not on headphones, so that's all good. As long as you can hear me, fine. I want to talk to you about two things, sort of about your current practice before we get into what we're talking about today, which is a restructuring primer, a bankruptcy primer for Canadian businesses. But I talk to partners from your firm. I talk to partners from competitors of yours, and one thing that amazes me is we just even I'm from the industry, like I'm KPMG alumni. It just blows me away how big your firm is and how big the other large firms are? Where do you rank in the market in terms of employees? Do you know?
So we're the fifth largest in Canada in size. And so we now have 5,500 professionals across the country. So, when I joined,
Crazy.
Yeah, 9, 10 years ago, I don't know exactly what the number was, but it was a fraction of that. So 5,500 today across the country.
So large, right? And the law firms are the same. I've been talking to the law firms, obviously. I talk to them every day, and they're just massive businesses, and we never, outside of your business, we never think about that.
Correct. Yeah.
Even if you're alumni and you're dealing, listen, people are going to be listening to this show, years from now, and we don't want to make it a COVID-19 show, but we're in the middle of COVID-19, and a lot of the liquidity issues, maybe not restructuring, maybe that's a hard word, but you guys have to think about that for your own business. All of you. No, you don't want to pick on MNP, but everybody in the professional services. Like, it's just a massive overhead.
I think that's right. I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, I don't think there's any firm who's unaffected by what's going on around us. I don't think any industry is exempt, although certainly there are some industries that are enjoying better times during this than others. But I think the professional services world has been hit, and we are experiencing as an industry change, just as everyone else is, and we're dealing with it, coping with it.
Yeah.
And there will be long-term changes for us, just as there will be long-term changes for everybody out there. And I think we're all going to learn from this experience.
Sheldon, before we get rolling, your personal practice, would you describe that as largely debtor or largely creditor, or some combination?
Of both. Over the course of my career, I've had probably primarily a more debtor-focused practice, but in order to do the type of work we do, you need to appreciate and understand both the secured debtor side and the debtor side. So I don't think you necessarily need to be exclusive to one area, and I think it actually benefits if you have an understanding on both sides of the
Exactly. So for those that just for clarity, when I ask that question, the debtor side means that you're really engaged by and helping the business itself go through the restructuring process. And the creditor side means you're really helping the secured lender, which means the bank in most medium and small businesses, but not always the bank, but basically the bank. And you're helping them. And you may end up doing the same restructuring. It's just from what perspective you're coming at the file. Fair to say?
Actually, I'll give you a story from an example I had some years ago, actually going a couple years ago now. Got involved in a file, and this is a company that was in the bank special loans department. There was already a professional services firm, one of our competitors, on for the bank. And the lady called me asking if I could help her. And I said something to her that she said, she was shopping. She was looking for the right professional. And she said, I'm fatigued in the way of dealing with consultants, and I don't know how they help me. And I said, and the bank already has a consultant. So she says, well, why do we need another one? And I said, well, we got to try to design something. Your business is faltering. We got to find a solution that fits for you and your objectives. We also have to find a solution that will also work with the bank. And she said, no one's ever said that to me before. Everybody was always fixated on trying to solve the bank's problem. And I think if you lose sight of that, which is if you lose sight of you're dealing with a business who has a life of its own, employees, stakeholders, you lose sight of the fact that you're just singular focused on the bank's problem, you've missed the boat for everyone. And so you need to bring about a solution that works for everybody.
What a great lead in for me. Thank you. Because last week I did a show with HMB Legal Counsel out of Chicago, which is Aaron Hammer and Rick Ryan. Do you know those guys?
I do very well.
You must know Hammer.
I know both of them, man. Yeah, everyone knows that. Everyone knows Hammer.
Yeah. So good friends of mine, and Hammer for years and years and years. Rick's a new friend of mine. So what better guys to do a U.S. bankruptcy and restructuring primer show with? And this would be the Canadian version that I wanted to get up on our channel. And the thinking for me is, again, we're not doing a COVID show, but this is a good time to talk about restructuring because I just think every business in the world globally has been affected by this virus, most for the negative, some for the positive, as you pointed out. But even the ones that are affected to the positive, how do they deal with that? The working capital stresses that go along with that weren't thought about beforehand, and the operational stresses weren't thought about beforehand. And so, I just think that there's a whole bunch of good companies that don't normally fit into the world that you and I spend a lot of our time in. You're all of your time, me, part of my time. But there's the 80% of the businesses that are never going to be there, and now they're there, and they don't have the tool set, and they're disoriented. They don't know the way out. They're stressed emotionally. They don't know how to make decisions in uncertainty. And what they don't know is that there's informal ways to try to deal with, but there's also formal ways that may just make this a lot easier. Not that it's easy, but a lot easier. And there is a path forward out of the mess and the fear that they're in right now. And one of the reasons that was a long way to say, one of the reasons I wanted you in particular to do this show is because I know that you have a long career of understanding the banks, but worrying about that business and the business owner, right?
That.
Which is not the same as everybody in your business, which is not a bad thing. They just built their career another way. But anyways, I'll let you comment on that.
Yeah, no, appreciate that. I mean, it's first off, the long career comment. That just means I'm old. But anyway, that's a whole. But yeah, the companies that have not experienced. So I think there's going to be a range of companies that are going to go through this process. And as you say, everyone's been impacted by COVID to varying degrees. And I think what this is going to do, and it isn't directly answering your question, but I think it hits the point. I think before COVID, there was a lot of companies that were, for lack of a better term, hanging on. There were a lot of companies that were, and they were hanging on, and there was lots of liquidity out there, and lots of people looking to invest in situations, and they've been able to mosey along without the need to actually go through a formal restructuring, because there was always another source of money to bail them out. Those companies, I think, through this process will be weeded out, or maybe the unfortunate victims of this process, because that money will no longer be there, perhaps, for them. You have a whole host of other companies that were exhibiting some kind of distress, but were not ailing as badly. And now this has put them in a position where they are going to have a greater need to resolve those problems. And we'll probably have to look at both their performance, the operational side of their business, and see how we're going about changing it if it's necessary, and what is causing the hemorrhaging, and how do you stop it, and they may need to go through restructuring. And then, as you mentioned, you have the companies that are strong players who may, as you say, face some liquidity challenges because their balance sheets were strong but now have been weakened. They are going to need to ramp up when things kick back into gear, and are going to exhibit some challenges in getting there. And I think they may be able to resolve their problems, hopefully more on an informal basis. Some of the government relief certainly has tempered some of the pain on some companies are feeling, and prolonged the lives of certain companies and helped out others. So hopefully the result of that is some of these companies will be able to do what they want to do informally without having to go through a formal process. Having said that, to fix what ails them, they probably still should be aligning themselves with a team of advisors and professionals to make certain that they understand what they're embarking on, because it's new territory for them, as you mentioned, and that they have that team around them. So the financial advisory team being, somebody who can help them with their turnaround, somebody who's got the ability, like yourself, to steer them in the right direction. somebody like ourselves who can, present them with their options and take them through a formal process if they have to. And good insolvency counsel to make certain that they understand what it is that they are dealing with from a legal point of view. And I think if the businesses, so far I've seen lots of businesses reach out, and it's kudos to them because they're being proactive and recognizing.
Reaching out to you guys?
Yeah, reaching out to us. And,
Yeah.
and I mean, I think what you've seen is early on, we had companies reaching out in shock. It just hit them hard and hit them fast, and they didn't know what tomorrow would bring. And of course, then the government relief kicked into gear. And some of those companies are taking a wait and see approach. Some of those companies are being proactive and trying to figure out what is the way forward. We don't know when we're going to get back into business. We don't know what that's going to look like, but we want to make certain that we're communicating with our stakeholders and we're figuring out a game plan and have a master plan to roll this out when we're ready. And those companies will be ahead of the game.
Right.
So I think the good companies, the ones that you talked about before, are going to have a tendency of, unfortunately, a lot of them are going to be the kind of company that never had to seek that kind of help.
That's my point.
Yeah.
My point is that they've got management teams and advisors that are wholly not prepared to deal with this level of stress and uncertainty, because they were good cash flowing companies before this, right? By the time you and I would see a troubled company, that's your career. It's a good chunk of my business from time to time. By the time we actually meet that company, they've been through a year of this or 6 months of this, right? They've become accustomed to the stress. They've already talked to 3 people and they've got some advice. Like, they're in that world, right? So we don't get to see the initial shock of the whole damn thing, right? And we're seeing that now. I mean, I think that's what you're just describing. And I just worry that those otherwise good businesses are just going to be wholly incapable. Now, on the other hand, they're good businesses because they're already great management teams. So they'll probably be able to execute with some basic advice.
Right. And you hope that's the case.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, as you know, one of the things that ails and causes failure for businesses is bad management. These companies are generally going to be companies that have good management and have steered the ship in the right direction.
Yeah.
Are now navigating through some turbulence, and that turbulence is new, and they haven't steered the course clear through this before. So new territory for them, and hopefully they're sophisticated enough to realize I need some assistance during this. This is something that is new, a new experience, and I think many businesses are doing that. We're hearing the stories of businesses that are pivoting their business model to recognize the changing world that is happening and trying to put together a plan as to what that pivot looks like and how they're going to position themselves for success going forward.
It forces you to think about things you've never thought about before. So on the show last week, Aaron Hammer at HMB is not only is he a lawyer, but he's an entrepreneur, and he has some restaurants that he owns, and in particular, he's locked into Red, the steakhouse in Miami.
Right. I'm looking forward to visiting him down there.
Getting our free steaks, yeah. So he's shut down, of course. I have to go back and listen to the show to remember the exact details, but they started delivering where they weren't delivering, having takeout where they didn't have takeout before, like every other restaurant. But he's also been working with his meat supplier, and they've started, in effect, an online butcher shop. And now he's like, wow, we're going to take this national.
Right.
Just out of our market. And these are things that they're going to 100% continue coming out of this crisis.
Right.
And so it's forced that business owner to rethink business models, which comes up with creative solutions. And I always tell people decision-making and uncertainty requires a number of things. One is it requires you to take a position. Like, you have to decide whether you're right or wrong, doesn't matter. You just have to decide, we're going to go back to work on this day, and here's what go back to work looks like. Like, is it going to go from 0 to 100, or is it going to go 0 to 5% to 10% next month? Like, I'm not here to tell you what that decision ought to be. I can tell you what I decided for my businesses, right? But you need to make that decision. But I will tell you, if you can't make a decision, take a position on that, then you can't make any decisions at all, right?
Right,
Because you have a
100%.
reference. And you can change your mind this afternoon based on new information. That's okay. But if you don't have a position, then you're lost. And then the other thing you need is you need priorities with which to make hard decisions. Because if you don't have an abundance, then you have a limitation, and you need to prioritize. And so my three priorities in my business are I seem to say this every show for a month now, but is the health and mental well-being of my employees. Like, I don't want them to be stressed and depressed and freaked out. That my employees can pay their rent and eat, okay? And that doesn't necessarily have to be on me. It could be on a government program, right? But I need to know that that's happening. That's priority number 2. And number 3 is I want to leapfrog my competition because everybody is frozen with fear, which means I want to use this opportunity to double down and move forward and these different business models. And I've gone through shows with a million things that you could be doing while you're not open to come back stronger and better than ever. So those are the things. You need priorities, and you need to take a position. And anyways, that's been my counsel.
That's 100%. I mean, and the importance of having your staff calm down and comfortable, and then secondly, being able to say, I'm going to come out of this stronger, and position yourself for that is critical. But there's a group of parties that we have not talked about, which is we're talking about companies that are exhibiting some distress. There are still going to be companies who have very strong balance sheets and are going to be able to look at this as a total opportunity to acquire weaker companies and grow their businesses because their balance sheet's strong, and will look to this as being a total opportunity to explore ways of growing their existing business. And
so I'm sure in your practice, you have a partner under your same profit umbrella that does corporate finance and investment banking and M&A and stuff.
Correct.
And are they, and refinancings? Are you guys seeing a bunch of that work?
Actually,
right now?
I mean, that stuff is quieter because of the conditions that are out there.
Yeah.
But we have heard of clients in our firm who are in different industries and have identified that they're on the hunt for opportunity, and they're in a position to look for those acquisition opportunities. So they're looking for targets, and they've contacted us saying, if you are aware of anything that comes about, we're on the prowl. And those companies right now, I mean, to the extent that there's businesses out there to acquire, and I think the fallout of this is going to be down the road when business resumes and the government relief is dried up and people actually take stock of where they're at. I think that's where the increase in filings will be, and the increase in opportunity, and the increase in activity that you were speaking of. So I think that's coming. But the people who are looking at opportunities right now are also going through an interesting time, because they're looking at acquisition opportunities in a virtual world. You're actually looking at buying companies remotely, because you can't go and see them, you can't go touch them or feel them. And it presents some challenges for them as well. So I think, we're into, interesting times in that front too. So people looking to acquire businesses should definitely be very careful in making certain that they're not buying into a problem. I mean,
we're buying a troubled business. Well, we're under contract to buy a troubled business, and they're locked in, and we're on due diligence phase. We were supposed to close April 30th. I pushed it off to May 31. The senior lender is, calling every day, what's going on. And so I got all sorts of issues. Actually, one thing I want to talk to you about later is the tool set of companies, and, specifically cash flow models and accounting and that sort of thing. Well, these guys, turns out their banks weren't reconciled since last August. Right. So I got issues with that. Right. We literally started the AR confirmations this morning. But the big thing for me, the biggest issue by far, is who the hell is going to go count inventory?
Right. Right. Yeah. And that's the problem and are the supply chains intact? Is the customer base going to be there when you buy them? Those are issues that you're buying in a sea of uncertainty.
Yeah.
There's never certainty in any acquisition, as you know. Anytime you buy into a situation, but here you're dealing with, if you're buying from an insolvent situation, no reps, no warranties, as is, where is, and in a virtual world. And so, it's already difficult to buy.
Well, I'm buying the senior.
Right.
On this.
Yeah.
with a deal with the shareholders.
Right. Yeah, no, if you can get the reps and warranties and conditions that you require that gives you comfort, and you have the right adjustment factors built into the agreement, you'll be fine. But for lots of people,
you'll be fine to an extent, but if you can't count inventory in this manufacturing business,
right.
There's a limitation to that. I'll be fine.
Yeah, and is equipment functional? Is all those things become more of a challenge in this environment.
Yeah.
So I think there's going to be, just as again, there'll be discomfort for some people getting on a subway or taking a plane. There'll be discomfort for some people buying businesses and closing deals in this environment. So
definitely is. All right, let's get at the formal restructuring. So we have a hypothetical, whatever, manufacturing company. I guess I can't say whatever because the size of the business matters. But
right.
Okay. Why don't we start with say a 20 million, like a mid-sized Canadian $20 to $50 million revenue turnover company.
Sure.
Whatever debt goes along with that, because in your world you think more about the debt size than you do the revenue.
Right.
And they're freaked out. They're not making good decisions because of the uncertainty. They're 2 months behind in rent. They haven't paid their supplier since mid-March. They're running at either 0 to 40% of revenue, on what would be a normalized number. What are the formal, they're building up debt.
Right.
Because what people aren't really grasping sometimes, I find, is that if they didn't pay their landlord, it's not like they don't owe that landlord. It's coming back, right? They borrowed the money from the government. It wasn't a grant, coming back.
Right, you got to pay it back.
They got BDC to help them. That's loans. I don't know if BDC's issued any money yet, but if they have, it's a loan. And, there's probably a personal guarantee associated with that. Like, all of this is helping, but it's all leverage. It's all accumulating debt. And so you need to deal with that at some point. And so how does Canadian law help this business? How does your practice help this business? Let's just go over that as a primer.
Yes, sir. So a lot of times the companies look at exploring the formal options that they have available to them, and they're coming at it at different conditions. So sometimes they come at it because they're getting external pressure from the bank or a lender or CRA. Perhaps they're not paying their taxes. As you mentioned, the landlord may be exerting pressure. And so oftentimes they have this buildup of pressure and are uncomfortable as to whether when they go to the office tomorrow, their building, that their doors are going to be open and not taken over by the landlord, or the bank accounts are not seized by a CRA, or the bank hasn't issued notices of intention to enforce security and given them notice and demand. And so in those situations where they have pressure and they need to stop the pressure, they can enter into formal insolvency proceedings. And just before I hit on what that is, so the insolvent situation, is unable to pay your debts as they come due. So the cash flow side of it, or the balance sheet side of it, is assets being less than liability. So in order for them to look at this as an option, they got to be insolvent. They got to have business in Canada or have assets in Canada and be operating. And they can explore the possibility of a restructuring either under the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act, which is a federal legislation, or the Companies Creditors Arrangement Act, which is also a federal legislation. So people basically say, why would I go one versus the other? Why would I choose to go in one or the other? Before we get there, so why file?
And Sheldon, before we move on, can I just, so those two pieces of legislation, if you're a business owner in Windsor or, out in Red Deer, Alberta, and you're, you've heard from your accountant or you've heard from your local lawyer and they've talked about an NOI or a CCAA, that's what they're talking about. The NOI is a notice of intent to file a proposal under the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act, which was the first thing you said.
Right.
And the CCAA is the Companies Creditors Arrangement Act, because I find that they throw around these acronyms like EBITDA and they don't really know, they don't know what it is necessarily. And that's what you're talking about. So you're giving the proper formal legal explanation but they've heard about it, but under a different term. So that's it, correct?
Correct. And
just wanted to make that point.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And what it does by filing under those pieces of legislation, it creates the creditor protection that we speak of. So there's a stay of proceedings imposed upon the creditors, and that stay of proceedings prevents creditors from taking action to continue or commence legal action to enforce their rights. And so it gives the company breathing room, an opportunity to operate in a stabilized environment and time to put together a plan to present to their creditors. So
if I can interrupt you,
yes.
And I'm sorry, I hate doing that to people on the show, but this is such an important point because it feeds into our later discussion on informal restructurings as well. To me, it does, because that's how I do informal restructurings, is the supplier that's suing you and won't ship to you anymore, although they're a critical supplier, the landlord that's threatening to evict you, the bank that has served their demand and they want to enter a forbearance agreement, you think the terms are egregious, right? All of those stakeholders of your business, when you go through one of these proceedings, puts a stop to that.
Correct.
Not for long, maybe, right?
Yeah.
But it gives you a little breather so that you can have help of the court ultimately to sort this stuff out with the help of your professionals and come up with a plan that satisfies everybody. That's the essence. And it doesn't matter which piece of legislation it is, and it doesn't matter what country you're in at the end of the day. Like, that is all bankruptcy restructuring is fundamentally everywhere, correct?
Correct. And what again, it goes back to when I said earlier on, these businesses have some hemorrhaging, and in most cases, because they wouldn't be in this position if they weren't. And so one of the keys in filing is to identify the problem early, recognize it when you have cash in the bank, still have liquidity or have access to liquidity, because oftentimes people wait much too late before they actually think about going down this route. And not being proactive, not taking steps early, only limits options, only limits the opportunity for us to fix the business. So embarking on this process, and each of the processes have their own costs, and I'll get into that if you wish.
I think people need to have a flavor of what it costs. The HMB guys in the US, I talked to, they talk 15, 20 minutes about Chapter 11 and this and that. At the end of the day, I just said, like, what does that cost? Right? Like if you're a $20 million company, like, oh, you can't. That's not
how long is the string? Yeah. And so,
right.
I mean, there's an element of that, but I mean, that you're
but not nearly as bad in Canada, but there's still an element of that.
There's still an element of that. And so I'll get into the difference between the two, if you wish, in terms of how they're structured and what they provide you, if that's what you want to cover up.
Well, I don't want it. I just want to, like you don't need to talk about statutory versus court or the time periods, anything like that. But
no.
If you're a manufacturing company, as I described, in trouble, you've got these two pieces of legislation available to you. Almost 100% of the time, if you're in real trouble, here's a question that may help this discussion. If you're, no matter what size of business you're in, you should almost always just file your NOI because you can convert it to a CCAA a week later. Is that fair to say?
Okay, so a lot of people would disagree with that comment. I actually am in the camp or court of saying I buy into that. And the reason I buy into that is because the acts are harmonized. I mean, you can essentially do the same things under the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act as you can in the CCAA. But here's the kicker. To get into the BIA restructuring requires that you have a few pieces of paper. One,
Exactly.
a notice of intention to file.
I could do my NOI filing and seek protection. I could do that this afternoon.
Correct. If you give me a creditors list and you give me the name of the company, and I have a resolution of the directors and a consent of a trustee to act, I electronically file that, and voila, I have a stay.
Yeah. And if I were the most organized guy in the world, it would still take me 3 to 4 weeks to get my CCAA. Is that fair to say?
It would take some time and come at a greater cost. So the application to get into the CCAA requires a court application, which requires materials. And materials take time to prepare, and it takes, you get into the court. And today, the CCAA, they put in it used to be when you filed and you got relief, you had an initial order, the first day order, you were given 30 days of protection. Today, you're given 10 days of protection. And
really?
Yes. And so that 10 days is only allowing you to get relief that you reasonably require to carry on the operations of the business in the ordinary course. So it used to be people would go to court first day and they would seek a number of relief from the court. Interim financing, oftentimes required in restructuring processes.
Yeah.
Approval to get a sale process launched in the process. Charges for professionals. There would be a whole gambit of relief, an array of relief being asked of the court without notice to stakeholders. So they changed it so that you have to come back on 10 days notice, 10 days with notice to your stakeholders that you're seeking this relief. And so now you got 2 attendances out of the gate. In the BIA, once you enter in there, the reason why people are concerned about entering a Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act restructuring is because there's only 2 ways out. One, you either get through it and you either die, you're bankrupt, or you come out with a successful proposal. But fundamentally, when you look at it from a practical point of view,
well, that's not really true, right? Because practically, if you have the right trustee, this could just drag out a long time.
It could drag out for a long time, but I mean, it costs money to drag out. And so I'm saying that practically speaking, you either have a viable proposal to offer to your creditors at the end, or a viable plan under CCAA, or you don't.
Exactly.
And if you don't, the tendency at the end of a CCAA, if it's not going to work out, is to bankrupt a company. You tend to end up in the same spot. And so to your point, coming back to your point, you can convert. You can get most of the same relief in a BIA proposal as you can CCAA. So from what you're trying to do, you can get there a whole lot more cost effectively. You always have the means to convert if you need to. There are some court attendances in the BIA proposal, so you got to seek extensions.
Yeah.
But similarly, there's court hearings in CCAA. So my default tends to be, to the extent we can do it, try to start with a BIA proposal.
Right.
Because invariably they'll be much cheaper.
Right. Because if I'm the business owner and I'm stressed and I got people coming at me and I'm just throwing my hands up and I'm coming to you, I don't want help, a month from now.
Right.
Right. I want help tomorrow. Let's talk about that $20 million company. If I'm going to go through a notice of intent to file a proposal, the reason it's called that, everybody, is because when you file the notice of intent, it says, well, I'm gonna send you a proposal. I intend to send you a proposal, creditors, and now you're all stayed under the law until I do that 45 days later, unless 30 or 45.
30, so you get initial 30 days.
30 first, and then 45.
You can apply for extensions for 45-day periods up to an additional 5 months. So you get 6 months, up to 6 months of operating under the notice of intention phase to figure things out.
Right? So I'm gonna implement my turnaround plan. I got some breathing time. I'm gonna I'm going to give you a proposal. And a proposal looks like what? It looks like I'll pay you 20 cents on the dollar for everything, or I'll pay 100 cents on the dollar, but over 5 years, we're going to turn it into some sort of term loan, dividend, distressed pref kind of thing, right?
Let me give you a story about, so there's no one size fits all.
Yeah.
And every situation, I always tell people there's two things that you need to do. You need to offer your creditors better than they would get in a bankruptcy.
Yeah.
And you need
more
to be
than
able
10
to,
cents.
and you need to be able to afford what it is you're offering. Because, and this is interesting because, you know, in each of these restructuring proceedings, whether we're acting as a proposal trustee, as the term is called in a BIA proposal, or we're a monitor in the CCAA, we're ultimately an officer of the court. We owe our obligations to the creditors in the court. We don't act, we're not the debtor is not our client. So oftentimes that's misunderstood, but when we're basically a broker on these deals trying to help out.
Yeah.
And so I'll give you one case study.
More of an intermediary than a broker, like a go-between.
A go-between. And so, but you're trying to understand everyone's perspective, and you're trying to, you know, present the creditors with something that you feel is fair and reasonable in the circumstances, because just because it's better than a bankruptcy doesn't mean the creditors are going to accept it. They may.
And I think what the business owners who go through this, hopefully never in their life, but if they do, hopefully once in their life, what they don't understand is what is so black box and completely a mystery to them is so repetitive for you.
Right.
For me, although every deal is different, but it's repetitive. You know what the bank wants, and you know how they're going to make decisions, and you know how the suppliers are going to think, right? Not that there's not some rogue jerk from time to time, but but even that you've seen before. You know what the landlord, what their rights are, what they're going to think. So it's a formula for you within a bandwidth, and and that's your job. Your job is just to marshal everybody into where they're going to end up, anyways.
Well, one of the things I'm going to tell you is when we're, you know, here we are, your audience is largely companies out there who are going through some of these challenges. And one of the first things we hear when we meet with a company is, we can't do this. Our customers won't stick with us, and our suppliers won't supply. And this is actually, I know this is not a COVID webinar, but this is actually somewhat an easier time to probably present.
100%.
Because everybody's going through this. But the one thing so I've been at this now, I mean, proposals actually came into vogue in the BIA 1990-ish, is when, you know, the government gave up their priority and people looked at the ability to make a proposal to creditors a little bit stronger. And CCAAs are only there for companies that have greater than $5 million of debt, generally involving more complex situations, but doesn't have to be. And so proposals were out of reach for small and medium-sized companies until the 90s. And I've been hearing this since the 90s. You know, if we do this, companies will bail on us, our customers will bail on us, suppliers will bail on us. And what I've tried to comfort everybody with is suppliers have credit departments and sales departments. Sales departments generally are hungry to do business and usually win the arm wrestle with the credit department. So in these cases, typically supply terms are going to be cash on delivery. Why you don't lose anything. And for many, if you're an honest, hardworking company that you run into difficulty, you've maintained a very strong and long relationship with one of your suppliers or your customers, they're going to see this for what it is. It's a blip in the radar of relationship. You know, you've gone through a difficult time. It's a one-time, hopefully, write-off on a bad debt with an opportunity to continue doing business. Hard to get new customers again. So people tend to want to continue doing with you. And if you're delivering a good product or service, your customers are going to want to continue dealing with you. So this process it gives you a framework, each of them, BIA and CCAA, gives you a framework to look at your business, size it up, and evaluate what does the model look like going forward? What do we need to position ourselves to look like? And we as a trustee or a monitor in the CCAA can help the company provide the tools in these legislations that allow you out of bad contracts, allow you out of bad leases. I mean, you look at the retail world today, how many companies are going to be looking to extricate themselves from bad leases? So these legislations are built on they give you the tools to do the operational changes you need to make to pivot your business to a model that is viable going forward.
Can you break a lease in a proposal?
You can break a lease. And
Really?
so there's a damage claim. So the counterparty
Yeah, but it's an unsecured damage claim.
It's unsecured damage claim. And so it'll be included in whatever it is. So I always say there's a numerator in a proposal and there's a denominator. And go back to my comment to you before. The proposal has to offer greater than what a bankruptcy would look like. So typically when you have a damage claim, your denominator changes, but your numerator is still going to be a function of how much would the creditors have got if there had been a bankruptcy? Yeah. What would the liquidation value of the assets be? And you're going to offer something greater. So going back to your cents on the dollar, generally most proposals are based on a basket. Here's the basket I'm going to offer you to settle my debt so that I can improve my balance sheet. Because that's, these are balance sheet fixes. The BIA and CCAA restructurings, the proposal itself.
But they're more that they're balance sheet fixes, yes, but they also buy you the time to implement the plan and change because, so for example, I did a restructuring deal with your firm in Calgary. I think you recall that. It was a couple of years ago.
Yes, I do.
And what drove it at the end of the day, notwithstanding all the craziness that was going on with rogue shareholders and frauds and this and that and other things. But at the end of the day, it was the leases was why I needed to do that. And I said, well, I spent 6 months in this company because I was hired as a chief restructuring officer, a CRO, which is when one of the stakeholders hires you to come in and just fix stuff. And so, well, we could do this, we could do that. And I did all those things and we were fine, but we were never, ever, ever going to make money again. And the reason we were never going to make money again is because we were tied to these long-term legacy contracts, these leases, which were, from 5 years ago, before any of the current people were around, and they were related party. They were way above value because there was a little fig involved in there. and so, like, what are you going to do? Like, there's just zero you can do it, so you have to break it. That's your only option to save these jobs. And I always define success as saving some jobs, right? And so you got to break them. And to break them, you got to do something formal. That is the only thing that I can't negotiate informally.
Right. And so anytime there's a need for a change or an assignment of a contract, we have tools in these legislations that allow us to do things on even sometimes forced basis where the counterparty doesn't wish for it to happen. Because the court ultimately is going to be the final adjudicator as to is the change that's being made required in order to affect the restructuring and the viability of a plan going forward. So the court's going to be the final adjudicator.
Yeah. So if I'm Joe's Eats or Dimitri's on Danforth, and I've been closed down for, that's a street in Toronto, you guys, and I've been closed down as a restaurant. Yeah. Yes. If I've been closed down as a restaurant for 3 months now, and it's going to be another 4 months, I haven't been able to pay my rent, and maybe my rent was on the high side to begin with, but now in a new market, wow, it's probably way overpriced.
Right.
In a proposal, could I break that lease and have a renegotiation?
Or you can simply just renegotiate. Yeah, so you don't need to break it necessarily.
Well, I know, but if my landlord just tells me to get lost and, by the way, pay my 6 months back rent, I could force a negotiation, a more formal negotiation with them, because that landlord needs a tenant too.
Correct. And so it's interesting. So I'll go back to my comment at the beginning about, again, we're not COVID related, but it's interesting to see what has happened on leases. So I got calls early on, and I think the presumption was that landlords would just renegotiate or defer payment of rent because the perception is the landlord's the bigger player, right?
Yeah.
And the debtor's got the one who's struggling. But oftentimes it's the landlord who's got the investment in the property as a retirement fund or as an investment that's also suffering. And I'll give you one quick story. So I'm on the phone with a debtor who calls me, business is struggling, and has a couple of landlords. And I said, you owe any money to the landlord? And the lady said, actually, the landlord owes me money. I said, how's that? She says, well, I had to lend the landlord money because otherwise they were going to default on the mortgage and I was going to lose my business. And so you're right. I mean, the land
reminded me of a nightmare.
Story. And so
when I started Merchant Capital in the 90s, so I was a tenant in one of these business centers, which are technically not leases, they're services contracts. And I was doing my first, it was an LP offering memorandum, and we were 3 days from closing. And it turns out the business center, that was air quotes for you on the podcast there. The business center wasn't paying the rent. So although we were, and every other tenant on the floor was, it's a shared office space, like a WeWork, I think it would be the modern version of this. And so we go in and the doors are locked.
Oh no.
Right? So none of us can get in, even though we've paid.
Right.
And not only are the doors are locked, but this is where I learned about Bell Canada DID lines, is we don't even, our phone line is not a phone line, it's an extension on their phone line, which they also were not paying. So our phones were all cut off. And needless to say, we didn't close that deal. But sorry.
So definitely, it's an opportunity to look at every aspect of the business, and again, you're trying to plan out a model that works going forward. And once that model is in place, so like any situation, you're going to look at different forms of the model. You're going to stress test it through to see what works and what doesn't work. And then the tools available under the legislation allow you to shape that model and implement the change and get to where you want to get to. And so each of them has their attributes, but they're, as I say, they're harmonized. So they offer the same kind of tools and the court has certain jurisdictions. So, a thing like critical supplier, which is only under CCAA, but not under BIA. If you're in a BIA situation and there is a creditor who is a critical supplier to the business and there needs to be given special consideration to that creditor in order to affect a restructuring, the courts are going to look at that and give you the appropriate relief you need if it's warranted, because it
try to help to make sure that supplier continues to supply
so that
through this process,
so you can feed the business what it needs to generate whatever it's generating.
Yeah.
So we tend to find that the tools that we have, some of these businesses that you're talking about would be able to affect change without the benefit of the formal process. But a lot of businesses are going to have so many moving parts, so many creditors to deal with, so many issues to resolve, that they're not going to be able to do that without the assistance.
Well, look, I don't know anybody, I'm not trying to be arrogant or egotistical about this. I don't know anybody better at informal restructurings than me, right? Because I do that all the time.
All the time, yeah.
And I'm effective at it. But for me, even for me, breaking a legacy lease or a significant contract, or as you just described, getting all the stakeholders under one roof.
Right.
So because you have too many fires and you can't possibly carry on that many negotiations. I have the capacity to deal with more negotiations at simultaneous than most people do, but sometimes you just need to bring them under one roof. Like I cover can trusts a lot because I was loving that file and the story behind it. And at the end of the day, their CCAA is driven by multiple class actions in multiple jurisdictions in multiple courthouses and they just need to consolidate it, right?
Right, right. And
In
get the
the end.
recognition of multiple courts, right?
You have to. You can't possibly afford to do it otherwise. In the interest of time, I just want to cut this piece short, but you're a medium, you're a small business, start to finish, just compare the budgets for a proposal process versus a CCAA process, because the CCAA can be pretty expensive if things go wrong, in particular. Right. Like even in the best case, and it's much longer. So can you just, because that's what a client's going to ask you. A client's going to walk in the door, I'm a $20 million manufacturing company, or I'm a, whatever, Joe's Eats restaurant. What am I looking at here? Like, I'm running out of money, and what do I do? So,
and so there's no easy answer to that question, but I'll give you some sense of perspective.
Yeah.
So we've had some situations where people have come to us saying, what's it going to cost? And every situation is different, so case by case. But what's it going to cost to take us down a BIA process versus a CCAA process? The application in a CCAA process can be, lawyers will come up with different numbers, and I'm not a lawyer, but $25,000, $50,000, $75,000 to make that initial application. Keep in mind.
That just seems light to me. Sheldon.
Yeah, but I know what I'm saying. So that's being soft, but to keep in mind, in each of these processes, you're going to have the following players involved. Company is going to have counsel, right? Company needs to have counsel through this process. You're going to need a proposal trustee or monitor in the process.
Yep.
The trustee or the monitor is a officer to court. It needs to be separately represented. So you're going to be paying for the cost of the proposal trustee, the monitor, and its independent legal fees. You're going to need to pay perhaps for the cost of the fees and expenses related to arranging for interim financing. So you may have, if you arrange for short-term interim financing during the process, and the one nice thing about each of these processes is they allow for a party to come forward, provide you the working capital you need to get through the process, and on notice to the secured creditors to have a charge over and above every existing secured creditor, assuming that those creditors are not going to object to being primed. Oftentimes, the source of that money is the incumbent lender, but they oftentimes subject you to a higher rate of interest than you're usually accustomed to paying, plus a facility fee. Plus,
well, define that. So that DIP loan, as it's called, or a priming loan, is going to be what? It's going to be 15, 20%?
It ranges, but 10, 15 in this market, 10, 15, sometimes 20%.
Yeah.
And so
you're right. The cost of capital is a little bit lower. It's more the 10, 15, and it used to be more the 15, 20.
Right. So it can range. In riskier situations, it can range higher, but 10 to 15 is going to be roughly what you're paying. You're going to have costs with that. So I'll give you one example of a situation, and a proposal for a small business. We talked about notice of intention before and buying time. So not every situation needs to go through the NOI process. Some businesses are ready to present a proposal to their creditors, don't have any pressure points coming at them. No bank is coming after them, no landlords threatening them, no CRA issues, no other pressure. And they have the time ahead of the filing to do the pre-planning, and they can launch right into making a proposal to their creditors. In those cases, companies may be looking at $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 to get through a process. But where you go through an NOI or you go through a CCAA and you have in the BIA a number of extensions, maybe because you're looking to reshape or remap the business, maybe because you're looking for an investor or a buyer. And similarly in CCAA, you get the initial 10-day stay, you promote longer, you get further extensions, and you're drawn out for some months. You're into now the hundreds and thousands of dollars. So it's easy for larger, more complex situations to get into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And in the largest cases, you start seeing the 7-digit fees. So I'll give you an example.
Right. But let's just make it easy for people. I'm going to throw some numbers at you. You tell me if I'm nuts. So if I'm a $20 million manufacturing company, I got the usual balance sheet. I got the usual problems that you would see. If I could solve that simply, well, if I can't solve it simply and I do a CCAA because I have enough debt to qualify for that, I'm going to be on average, like it's not too easy, but it doesn't get weird. I'm going to be like 4 to 6 months and $300,000 to $500,000 by the time I'm done. Does that sound about right, or is that crazy?
And in most cases, yes. That
Right.
Again, that may be light in those cases.
Might be light these days. I'm so out of touch.
Yeah, no. I mean, every case is different, but that again, going back to my suggestion that you're dealing with a number of different people you're paying.
Totally.
Right.
Totally. And not only is it going to be 300 to 500, or maybe I'm light, but 150 of that's up front.
Yeah, you got to pay retainers.
Right.
Yeah,
So
you're gonna have to pay retainers.
So that's what people need to understand. The BIA, same sort of restructuring, but it's compressed, it's more statutory, doesn't have as much flexibility. But if I can get away with that, 100, 125 in 4 months.
Yeah, I mean, look, those
Does
are
that feel right?
Again, every case is different, but those are fair numbers. And so, I'll give you an example.
And sorry, before you give me the example, which I want to hear, with the BIA up front, maybe 25.
So a trustee would generally ask, so the trustee typically will look to get paid out of cash flow going forward, but initially takes a protection for its fees in case there is a bankruptcy down the road. Because one thing about a bankruptcy,
you're forced to be the trustee.
You're forced to be a trustee. You cannot resign the appointment. You can't leave the seat. So it's not like you're a consultant where you can simply say, I'm going to terminate my involvement. No. I'm not getting paid. So once you're locked in, you're locked in. And so, so the example I was going to give you was, so a trustee, by the way, so they would ask for a retainer for the bankruptcy cost. It'd probably be 15, 20, 25, right? Lawyer is going to ask, the trustee's independent counsel is going to ask for a small retainer because they generally don't get as heavily involved as the company counsel. The company counsel is going to require 15, 20, 25,000 every time you go for an extension for the stay. There's going to be a cost because you're going to need to get your counsel back involved, making a motion to the court. And so everybody gets armed up and prepared to file the materials. So every time you go for an extension, there's a cost. So the other aspect of these processes and what we tend to always encourage is right at the gate, right when we're retained, you want to develop what is the game plan? What is the roadmap?
Exactly where I'm heading. Because if you're just screwing around and trying to hold people off, this is a really expensive way to do it.
Right. And so the most important thing for us is right out of the get-go, what are your objectives? What are you looking to achieve? Are you looking to hang on to the business? Are you looking to extricate yourself from the business? Are you looking to sell the business? Are you looking to restructure yourself? Do you have the means to do that? And we draw the roadmap.
Exactly.
And you try to come up with a cost-effective, efficient way of getting from A to B. And you do that planning up front. That planning will allow you to reduce cost, which is a very important aspect of this. So the example I gave you, or wanted to give you, so it was a number of years ago, got asked to quote on a fairly complex file, and they'd already scoped out somebody to act, and the parties that they scoped out were all going CCAA. And I wasn't told what their numbers were. I wasn't told how much they were going to go. And I said, why don't we go BIA? Because going back to your comment, everything we could accomplish what we needed to accomplish under a BIA much cheaper. They said, what's it going to cost? And again, fairly complex situation, needed the full term of the BIA restructuring. So we needed to go 6 months. This was a business that underwent a sale process. So, we went and got a buyer, closed the deal, and completed the process within 6 months. I quoted and said we would come in roughly around 300. My competitors who were going under CCAA were quoting $1 million. And the debtor said, how can you possibly do for 300 what they were going to do for $1 million? And the answer lies in when fees became a bigger issue in the industry, there was a lot more filings of BIAs. And some people have gravitated that way and understood that you can do them more cost effectively. And even, there's the cannabis industry, you're seeing the shakeout now. And initially you saw CCAAs, and the more recent ones have been BIAs. And cash only goes so far, and you only have so much of it. So as opposed to spending it simply on the professionals, you need money to continue operating the business. And so you need to be aware of how much cash you have available to you and how you accomplish what it is you're setting out to do.
So I love that story because I wanted to, in my mind, make sure that I communicated 3 points to a Canadian business owner. And one is that there's a way to do this. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. There is law to help you to restructure this. There's people to help you. There's advisors to help you. There's people that can come in and lend to you in this environment. There's a way to do this, number one. And you've talked about the BIA and the CCAA. There's other little nuances of that, which we didn't get to, but we're already used up our hour. So that was number one. Number two is it's serious and expensive. So don't do it to mess around. Do it because you have a plan. You're going to turn around your business. You legitimately just need a little bit of time and help with the court to restructure to make this turnaround plan work. So you've got a plan. You want to make it work. And you work with your trustee and your advisors to roadmap that first. And then number three, which was your example, is although this is sort of the same thing over and over from your perspective, it's not a commodity. Everybody has a different view in this industry, right? And my biggest fear of it as a consumer of your product is that the file just takes a different direction in the middle. That is not what I wanted and is not what I signed up for. That's my biggest fear. And because I can't control it, because you guys take over and it just takes a life of its own, no matter what you say. That's what happens, right? And so if I don't have a trust in you and know that you believe in me and my business, that's not a good thing in this industry. I know that's an uncomfortable thing for you to talk about in your competitors and peers. And one of the things I like about you guys, and just some of your partners, by the way, like at the firm, is you're good to talk to that way, but you need to roadmap it and you really need to believe. I've been going through a bunch of calls with some US people, and one of the people I'm talking to had a family business in Southwestern Ontario, and it didn't go well when she was a kid, like with their father. We don't need to talk about the reasons, but they got involved in someone who would be local, whose name we both know. And there's a lot of integrity accusations there, right? There's a lot of gouging the file conversations. There's a lot of like, he didn't care about us kind of stuff. By the way, he was a receiver. He wasn't even acting, he was acting for the bank. Right. I'm not trying to make excuses for him, but, and the emotions involved in this business, but you also know that if I'm a business owner, I can get in a situation where things just go a different direction entirely from what I expected, and having a relationship with my trustee that I chose is important.
Absolutely, 100%. And I'll give you, I know we may be, I don't know, timing wise, if we're still good.
Yeah, well, wrap it up soon.
Okay. So I'll give you a quick story. So the company comes to me separate from going to a very friendly insolvency lawyer to me. So they get referred to me independent of their referral to the insolvency lawyer. And they come to me and they say, so if we hire you, what's your rate of success? And I said, my standard answer, my standard answer is, some of the best proposals die and some of the worst proposals fly because a lot of it isn't in our control. A lot of it is how well have you maintained your relationships with your creditors? How much do they want you to go forward? A lot of times, your filing, if you're a bad apple, they're going to want to get rid of you. So I give them that answer saying, look, with a rate plan, and if the company is one that everybody loves, you should be able to get forward. They go to the lawyer. And the lawyer answers very differently, but more effectively, which is said, they asked him the same question: what's your rate of success? And the lawyer said, if you listen to your advisors, really good. If you don't listen to your advisors, really bad. Now, truer words couldn't have been spoken, because that debtor did not listen to either what I had to say or the lawyer had to say, and their proposal ended up in failure. And so you need as you say, you need to have trust in your advisors. You need to have a good business that is worth saving or worth transitioning, and you need a strategy that makes sense. And to your points, I mean, there is lots of help out there for companies. The first sign for them is to acknowledge that they need the help. And one of the things about these processes, by the way, to your business is some of these companies, I'll give you another story. So I'm on the 9th day of a 10-day notice of intention to enforce. So the company's got 1 day for the creditor's rights crystallize. And I get a phone call and they say, we need your help. And so we can, as you said, an NOI you can effect quickly, and so we did. And the lender was somebody that I knew well, and the lender called me up and he laughed. He said, "You're not going to be able to save this company." And so it was a case where the owners and management were separate. Okay, so I go in and I identify that management's weak, and I tell the owners, I think you need somebody to come in and steer the ship. You need a good CRO, a good chief restructuring officer to help you, guide you through this process. And they bought in. And not all the time do they do that, because especially when it's owner managed. But
I don't remember getting that phone call, Sheldon.
That was before I knew you.
Okay.
And and the person I had brought in so this is a company that went from $20 million in sales to, by the time I was involved, I think like 12.
Right.
And they hired a CRO. They changed. So generally speaking, the party that gets you into trouble isn't the same party that's often gets you out of trouble. And acknowledging that and making certain you have the right advisors around you is important. In that case, not only did they turn the business around, that we arranged for them to have interim financing from a secondary lender. I got a phone call from the CRO saying, we paid out the secondary lender. We've refinanced the secondary lender. We got conventional financing. Now move forward a couple of years, CRO is still there. And he calls me and he says, do you have any competitors to our business? We're on the prowl to buy. Yeah. And so again, with the right team in place, engaging somebody like you, having somebody like ourselves.
We're actually going to have, we ought to have another show on that very topic. I have my top 10 list of ways to refinance a troubled business, and you've hit my top 2 today. And my top 2 are, number 1 is you need to admit you're in trouble. Right, because it's so mentally freeing. It allows you to bring in an advisor, but it also allows you just to make those hard decisions that you've been fretting about. Because if you realize that if you don't make them, it's just life and death, they become much easier, right? It removes the emotion from it. And number 2 is you need to identify the specific people that need to change. Okay, and it may not even be because it was their fault. But how do you ever convince the third parties, the bank, the secondary lender, your creditors that you're trying to restructure, if you don't make a change, then how do you answer the why now question?
Right. And
you don't.
Yeah, to your point. I mean, your lenders need, and we haven't touched upon this, and there is probably a need for follow-up discussion, but there definitely is. I go back to my comment about the lady who called me earlier on, and I told her that you have to first come up with a strategy for the business and then figure out where the bank fits in. If the bank doesn't buy in that you have the team that they have confidence in to steer the ship in the right direction, you're not going to have them on your side.
Exactly.
And you need to demonstrate to them that they're in good hands, the company's in good hands, and the bank has nothing to worry about. And
And we're doing the exact same thing with the exact same people isn't the answer.
Exactly. And I'm gonna shape this in a COVID way, which is the banks today are going to get inundated with bad loans, and there's going to be fallout of this situation, and they're going to have to triage those situations. They're not going to be able to keep everybody alive. They're not going to be able to keep everybody on life support. We are ultimately, you, me, we're the emergency room of the financial world. This is the ICU. And the banks are going to have to triage those incoming files and try to figure out, do we keep them on support or do we get rid of them? And it's so important for everyone who's listening to this to understand that coming up with a game plan, being able to communicate that game plan and have confidence in it to your lenders, to your stakeholders, and have a team around you that gives confidence to those banks that your file that they can take off their desk is going to be so important. They're going to have
it's number three on my list. Is like you don't go with a help me, you go with a yes or no question. Like, right. Here's my plan.
Here's my plan. And in this market, so much more important because they don't know which way their head is going to be turning.
Because unusually, different from every other crisis. This didn't happen in 9/11. This didn't happen in 2008. But they're as confused and stressed and uncertain as you are.
Right.
Right. They have their own issues. Right. So if you come to them and say, I know you're fine, Mr. Banker. How are you going to help me? They're not fine.
Right.
Right. They got to deal with their own stuff. So you need to go with them is like, here's my trouble. Here's what it means to you. And here's what I'm going to do about it.
Right. Exactly. Look, it's no different than the discussion with the landlord. You can't assume that just because the bank is bigger, just because your lender's presumably bigger, that they're going to extend a hand to everybody that comes out asking for it. And to case in point, I'm helping a company right now, and I've been helping them before COVID, and they're dealing with a situation where they have a piece of equipment they were hoping to get a deferral on from a lender, and I called the lender on behalf of the company with their permission, and so I get on the phone with the lender. This is a leasing company, and before I can even introduce myself, they were basically saying, we're going to stop payment on the next pre-authorized debit that comes out of the account, so we'll give you that right away, but we're going to come back to you within 2 weeks asking for some evidence as to why we should give you the relief you're seeking. And they're going to be evaluating that, and they're going to say, are you in need or are you not in need? So you need to make a case, just as you do when you go to make a loan and get a loan. You need to make a case for why the bank should be supportive of your plan. And if you come forward with a good business case, well thought out, well documented, this is where we're going to end up. This is what it means to you, bank, in your security position. This is why you should support us. The bank is going to be delighted. They're going to have a smile on their face because they're going to say, you just made my job easier. And that is golden for a lender.
It absolutely is. Because out of 100 loans, 3 of them did that.
Right.
It's really unusual.
Especially in this environment because, as you said, most people are unaffected before. It's all new to them. They're not used to it or not seeking that advice. And they're deer in the headlights at this point, and that's a problem.
Sheldon, how do people reach you?
Well, so they can reach me by telephone at 416-573-5320, which is my cell phone.
We'll put that in the notes too, if you're up for it.
Yeah, no, appreciate that. And my office line, 416-263-6945, and email Sheldon, SHELDON .title, TITLE, at MNP, Mary Norman Peter .ca.
and business owner can call you and spend 15 minutes on the phone. It's not going to cost them anything.
15 minutes would be a short discussion. I'm happy to give people time to explain the situation.
But the point being, they shouldn't be shy. It's not
They
going to
shouldn't be
cost them
shy.
anything. Right.
I've given you lots of stories today. This is the last long story I'll give you. Lawyer calls me, last year, says, I got a company for you. I want you to put into bankruptcy. I went and paid them a visit at the time when I could visit them, and listened to them for, a couple of hours actually. And they didn't need a bankruptcy. They needed advisory help in terms of turning their business around. And they were barely insolvent, but they had a broken business. And I'm happy to listen, give people an opportunity to explain what's ailing their business, and then see how we can help them and give them the type of service that they need without having too much service for them. If we have a menued approach, which is we're here to help them through their difficulties. We're here as a sounding board, a resource on a consulting basis, or as you mentioned, we can take them through a formal restructuring, have a complete suite of services.
Thank you everyone for listening. This has been Martinis with Scott. Sheldon, so much for joining us. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. Martinis with Scott, a show about winning momentum in business and leading an abundant life. If you're lost, you're unsure what to do, how are you going to get out of this, call me, call Sheldon, anytime. Just give a call, send an email. If you like the content, please subscribe. We're on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Thank you.
Stay well. Thank you, Scott.